Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our magic morning. For those of you I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Lindsay McDonald. I am the Chief Executive of Magic Breakfast, and I'm so delighted to be welcoming you to today's magic morning. It is a topic that we have been thinking about, talking about at great length at Magic Breakfast for the last couple of years now. We'll be hearing more about why breakfast is so important for children and young people in secondary school. As many of you, I'm sure, know, the governments across the UK have made some real demonstrations and commitment to support primary age pupils in terms of school breakfasts and their provision, but hunger doesn't stop at age 11, and we see the benefits of breakfast for older pupils in the hundreds of secondary schools and all through schools that we support every single day. And today is a chance and an opportunity to not just bring that lived experience and those voices from schools to life, but also to bring the context of the policy framework and the research that we have recently published. So without further ado, I'm delighted to start moving into our kind of first speakers. But just as a reminder, for those of you who have attended a Magic Morning, for those of you who haven't, it really does benefit from your engagement and your questions. Feel free to pop those into the Q&A section as we go along. As you hear from the different speakers, I'm sure different questions will come up, and there'll be time at the end when you'll get to hear from all of our speakers again. So please do feel free to add those in as we go. There will be a recording and it will be uploaded to YouTube. So if there's anything you missed that you want to listen back to, you are able to. And for those of you who are listening on YouTube playback, very grateful that you've joined virtually as well. So first of all, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, our very own Magic Breakfast's very own Head of Policy and Public Affairs, Nat Dilworth.
Thanks, Lindsay, and good morning, everyone. As Lindsay mentioned, I'm the Head of Policy and Public Affairs here at Magic Breakfast. I'm delighted to speak to you a little bit this morning about that policy context for secondary schools, but also a little bit more about how we as Magic Breakfast are working and advocating for an expansion of provision to secondary. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. I feel very quiz-witty. So as Lindsay mentioned, we've seen some really great success from the UK Westminster and the Scottish Government for primary age school breakfast provision. So in England, we have the Free Breakfast Club programme, which is for every primary age child in a state-funded school. And that programme is slowly starting to roll out with another 2,000 or so schools set to join from September. And in Scotland, in the recent budget in January, after months and years of very hard work, the government have committed and set out a roadmap, including funding for a national breakfast offer for every primary and special school in Scotland. That programme is being built and designed at the moment, and we're doing quite a lot of work to sort of support that design. But I think critically, that level of provision for secondary schools is a really different picture in that it doesn't really exist for secondary schools. So there are just under 4,000 secondary schools across England and Scotland with about 4 million pupils in secondary education. There isn't a national programme that exists in any of the devolved nations for secondary school breakfast provision. The only programme that we have is something called the National School Breakfast Programme, which was set up just under 10 years ago by the previous Conservative government and supports about 940 schools in areas facing the highest levels of disadvantage. So it's a really targeted programme, but it ends in July. In last year's budget, we were successful in securing the funding for a final academic year. So schools will get the same sort of equivalent value of money from September this year up to July 2027. But beyond that, nothing. There's a cliff edge in provision. We've had nothing from the government to suggest that this may be continued. So what that means is those thousands of pupils who are currently benefiting from school breakfast in their school are going to join those millions of pupils at risk of morning hunger each day. And we see that sort of compounded through rising cost of living and those sort of wider intersectional pressures that I'll come on and talk to you in a second. But what that also means is that with provision levels as it stands, that's only 1 in 4 young people in areas facing those sort of highest levels of disadvantage are being supported for this final year. And beyond that, nothing. Next slide, please, Lara. Thank you. So when we think about secondary school provision, I think it's really important for us to sort of set out what that level of need is. So as you'll hopefully see in our annual breakfast survey 2026 published this morning, about 9 in 10, 98% of our partner schools are reporting that the cost of living is making it harder for children to learn. And about a quarter of these schools are seeing a rise in demand for food vouchers, food banks, and emergency support from families. What that means is 4.5 million children and young people are living in poverty right now. That's 9 pupils in a class of 30. And specifically for secondary school pupils, we think that equates to about 2.1 million pupils around at risk of living in poverty right now. Through our root causes research that we published earlier this year, we've really taken a deep dive to look at that intersectionality of issues that can affect child poverty. And that ranges from a national, sort of more systemic level, so thinking around issues sort of the rising cost of living, increases that we're seeing in energy bills, looking then at sort of that community localized level. So for that, thinking around a lack of social council housing for families, which meaning they're increasingly reliant upon temporary accommodation. So almost being passed from pillar to post, moving to different areas across the country. And then bringing that back down to a real individual level. So the impacts we see for children and young people themselves, but also on their families too. So as I'll come on to talk about, households with children are sort of disproportionately affected by food insecurity. And at that individual level, what we also know is that 72% of young people living in poverty are in working households. 49% of those households living below minimum income standards, which suggests to us that wage increases are just not keeping pace with that cost of living, with inflation. And similarly, 34% of households in receipt of universal credit are also food insecure. Again, suggesting that those benefits, the system that exists to really support those children and families in need, aren't keeping pace with inflation. So that daily cost of putting food on the table, being able to turn the lights on, being able to use the internet to do homework doesn't exist for a lot of families and teenagers out there. And what really stood out to me as well, specifically for secondary age pupils and that teenager cohort, is the mental health and well-being impacts of poverty. So what we've learned is that 1 in 5 young people are worried about not having enough food to eat at home. That in itself is horrific. But compounding that in this age group is the issue of body image pressures that we're seeing increasingly prevalent amongst teenagers too. So 20% of girls aged 11 to 14 are skipping breakfast due to their weight concerns. 30% of boys are trying to bulk up. So all of these issues are just compounding into a really just concentrated effect that's having a real knock-on impact for teenagers and young people across the country. I think important to remember also is that behind these statistics are real children and real families who are struggling to make ends meet, who would benefit from that free school breakfast. And I put a quote on the slide there from one of our partner schools, just really exemplifying the problem. So young people attending school are hungry. Families don't understand the importance of health and healthy eating because all they're thinking about is the cost. And at school is often the only place that some of our young people in our partner school can get a meal. And there is that stigma around accessing food banks as well. Thank you, Sarah. Next slide. Thinking about this from a teenager and a secondary school perspective, whilst tackling child morning hunger is at the crux of a school breakfast provision offer for teenagers, the benefits and the outcomes that we think about for them go beyond food as well. So as you'll hear more about from Dr. Maddie and Iona's presentation later on this morning, we did a real key piece of research into secondary schools. But alongside that, we're also looking at these 4 outcomes that really impact on children, on young people's futures, specifically health and well-being. So we know that teenagers who eat breakfast report being happier and less anxious. We also know that a balanced, nutritious breakfast can provide 1/3 of a pupil's recommended daily intake. But thinking beyond that into that mental health issue I set out earlier ago, young people are feeling increasingly isolated, lonely. That move to the online world, that lack of belonging, that sense of community doesn't exist in the same way that it did 10, 20 years ago. So what we found through our programs and through our research, that breakfast club, that moment in the morning, can help increase those feelings of inclusivity, that sense of social cohesion, and that participation in school and within their community and home life as well. But interestingly, nutritional interventions like breakfast also can reduce reoffending, reduce crime, reduce antisocial behaviour, and reduce aggression rates amongst young people as well. And last year, the London Assembly's Police and Crime Committee actually released a report which recommended a secondary school breakfast offer as a key means of reducing knife crime and protecting young people from gang violence, which is a really sort of important consideration, particularly for this phase of education. Similarly, for their life chances as well, we know that teenagers who eat breakfast achieve on average about 2 GCSE grades higher. And we also see through our current programs and our current provision that breakfast clubs, morning moments can provide opportunities for enrichment and critical skills development, which support future employment outcomes. So, for example, our Breakfast Ambassador program teaches young people about leadership skills, communication skills, problem solving, team working, skills that don't necessarily come out through the national curriculum, but that we know employers are so focused on for when it comes to their future world of work as well. So there's a real opportunity with breakfast provision to support that additional learning. And finally, thinking around the social and economic benefits too. So our evidence from primary schools show that there's a £50 return on investment for every pound invested in primary school breakfast provision. We know that could be so much higher for secondary pupils. And given its association with improved attainment, it can increase lifetime earnings potential as well, which really strongly aligns with the Department for Education's own findings that a 1 grade improvement at GCSE levels is associated with an earnings increase of about 8,500. So if you combine that with breakfast, which could lead to 2 GCSE grades improvement, that number just doubles and triples as we go through. So the risk here is that without secondary school breakfast, these outcomes, these benefits that are going to support young people's futures are just negatively impacted and just might not be realised for some of those really vulnerable young people who need that support the most. Next slide, please, Sarah. Thank you. So what are we doing about this? So first of all, our direct provision. What we're really trying to do is expand and grow our current provision in secondary schools to make sure that more teenagers are fueling their futures, particularly with that cliff edge of provision of the National School Breakfast Programme coming in the next 12 months. What we also want to do is work with our young people to define the magic of breakfast. Why is it important for them? We can see those statistics, we can see that sort of academic approach to it, but what do they think and feel about breakfast? Take those learnings, take those views, and use that to optimise our existing and our future provision as well. Testing new approaches, piloting new ways of doing things such as extended breakfast at break times to help drive uptake and make sure that all of those young people can access that nourishing school breakfast. For our advocacy, we're about to embark on an ambitious, very exciting 2-year programme of research, looking really into some of those 4 themes that I talked about earlier. So how breakfast provision can support skills development and reduce the risk of young people becoming not in education, employment and training. How school breakfast can support physical health, but critically also their mental health and their well-being. How school breakfast can impact on crime prevention and crime reduction, and finally, sort of packaging that all up into a secondary return on investment. So that £1.50 figure, what does that look like for secondary schools? And within this next 2 years, we are going to create opportunities, take advantage of every single mechanism, engagement moment to influence policymakers and decision makers ahead of the 2029 general election. Let's all please cross our fingers and touch wood. We do not have a snap one before then. Appreciate that's a topical point at the moment with Andy Burnham. But in doing that, what we want to do is sort of transition policymakers and decision makers' ways of thinking about this from a need or a deficit. So children going without, young people going without, to an asset, to a want. We want a school breakfast provision offered for young people because it delivers all these cross-cutting outcomes for them. And finally, very quickly, I know I'm a bit over time, I'm sorry. Thinking about our campaigning and our mobilisation activities, we're growing and expanding our schools and teacher networks to make sure that we bring that lived experience and that practical solution to put that at the heart of our policy development and make sure that what we're recommending actually works on the ground and can be delivered by those schools. And I think most excitingly is the work we're doing with children and young people for our campaign. So living our value of putting their voices at the heart of our work, co-creating and developing our More Than Breakfast secondary campaign with those voices and views to help guide and shape that as we take that to decision makers and politicians over the next couple of years. So thank you so much for listening. I think there's time at the end for any questions, and I'm so sorry, Sarah, for overrunning a little bit, but thank you.
Thank you, Nat, and I think you were pretty much spot on in terms of time. So thank you, and thank you as well. Hopefully that's really helpful for partners and supporters to understand, as you say, the ambitious plans that Magic Breakfast has. But I think if we look at what we've been able to achieve, together over the last 20 plus years, I have every confidence we'll be able to go further and faster with what we have behind us. So thank you. We're now going to invite a couple of speakers from Rocket Science, which is a fantastic organization that has been supporting us, working with us on this research, identifying and highlighting some of those at times surprising, quite often upsetting findings that Nat spoke to just a moment ago. So first of all, we have Dr. Maddie Thompson, who is Associate Director of Research at Rocket Science, and she's joined by Iona Nixon, who is the lead consultant. So I'll hand over to both of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay, and hello, everybody. So as Lindsay said, we're from Rocket Science. We're a research and evaluation and fund-making organisation that has been working with Magic Breakfast since pretty much this time last year on some research looking specifically to understand what evidence there already is and where some of the gaps are around breakfast in secondary school age children. So as we heard at the beginning, and as I'm sure you're all very aware, breakfast provision in children has predominantly been focused on primary school age, and there's a lot of evidence there, but when it comes to understanding the challenges or the opportunities for older children, there's a lot less evidence. So we've done quite a rapid review, but we've reviewed sort of over 150 different sources, and also had discussions with stakeholders from Magic Breakfast as well as external kind of partners as well. So we've spoke to some of the kind of schools that you're going to hear from after us, and we've also spoken to some of the UK's leading sort of academic and researchers and policymakers and thinking around breakfast. The idea is to understand why secondary school age children are less likely to engage with provision. So sometimes when it's there, what's been found is that they're not always engaging. So to understand what some of those barriers might be. And also fundamentally to understand what Magic Breakfast can do to improve the uptake, the impact and the promotion. And a big element of this was really, as kind of Natalie went through earlier, was trying to pull together what those potential impacts and benefits are from sort of disparate areas of the research, really understand then the barriers both for young people wanting to have breakfast, for schools wanting to deliver or engage with it, and then also some of those wider challenges, understanding that breakfast is but sort of one meal of the day, and often some of these challenges around food impact breakfast as well as other meals. Perfect. So to start with then, we've looked at both the short and the long-term impacts of not having breakfast. On the sort of short term, obviously there is a lower overall diet quality. People are at greater risk of nutrient deficiencies or developing things such as metabolic conditions. But I think really importantly here is the long term. So not having breakfast can lead to poorer mental health and well-being. It can lead to a lack of social space, which has sort of psychosocial benefits. And as we've sort of mentioned earlier, it can also lead to some of these challenges around sort of crime and exploitation. So we spoke to some people working in London's Holiday Hope programme, in the Violence Reduction Unit, and they were saying that food can be used to coerce young people into negative friendships, and it's a massive driver to county lines and exploitation. So kind of the idea that people are hungry and don't have food can lead them to be exploited or push them into crime. It can also lead to shoplifting because obviously you're trying to get the food that's missing. More than this, it can lead to antisocial behaviour, fighting, kind of disruptive behaviour in classes as well. There's a real clear link between being well fed and able to concentrate. And again, this leads to lower cognitive engagement as well, which has, as we've already noted, impacts on attainment around GCSEs, around A levels. But as our research also kind of found, there was some evidence in North Europe showing that actually it can have long-term impact on people's educational and workforce outcomes, including sort of a lower wage across life, which in turn will then impact their ability to feed themselves and their families. So we can really look at this in the very sort of long term. When we think of then the impact of having breakfast, obviously in many cases this is sort of a switch of the negatives. People that have breakfast are much more likely to have a higher happiness and quality of life. A lot of this is because of the psychosocial benefits in being in a breakfast club. So actually meeting people, having that positive social space, being able to have a safe space, particularly for children that are quite vulnerable, to speak to an adult outside of their sort of more formal education, their kind of their lessons. We did a case study sort of visit where we were able to speak to some young people with special educational needs, and they were using this as a real kind of safe space to have that sort of trust adult relationship that maybe is harder to get in a much bigger kind of classroom space. Again, people have a more nutritious diet, which can improve their physical health as well as their sort of mental health too. And it was also then reducing some of these negative challenges and again, improving cognition, but also attendance and performance as well. So it's letting people concentrate more. It's encouraging people to come to school because not only is it school, but actually you're getting this kind of free meal, you're getting this opportunity to chat to people. Again, one of the schools we went to were playing cards and games in the morning and really sort of talking to the children as kind of peers. So there's lots and lots of different impacts that we can have that are really positive when we can provide that breakfast opportunity. There are, however, many barriers to both young people wanting to take up breakfast and to schools being able to provide breakfast. And these barriers operate at kind of the individual, so the child level and the school, but also then the broader structures in which we live. So in this case, kind of the UK sort of political, economic, and even cultural kind of structures. So on the individual level, again, as we sort of noted earlier on, some people are quite self-conscious. So we found that certain foods make teenagers, particularly when you're sort of going through those hormonal changes and everything's embarrassing and everything, because is the worst thing in the world. Having certain types of food could cause sort of self-consciousness and embarrassment. Things that were sort of grab and go, particularly for the kind of more teenagers, would deem to be have a sort of higher success rate. So giving someone fruit or a slice of toast, as opposed to making them sit and eat a bowl of cereal, was seen as ways to reduce that self-consciousness. People have different kind of personal needs, and this is sort of related to their body clocks, their body kind of composition. Teenagers in particular, their bodies wake up later than maybe younger children or adults do, and often the sort of preschool, so 8 o'clock in the morning breakfast is just too early, and they're still wanting to be in bed. Whereas we saw examples where it was delivered in break times and it was much more successful. And people have individual food preferences, and particularly people with that have neurodiversity, they may not want certain foods or want them in different ways. And again, there's time pressures. Secondary school children are often sort of responsible for getting themselves to school in the way that primary school may be dropped off by parents. They maybe don't need that kind of childcare, so parents are less bothered about dropping them off earlier. But also a lot of secondary school children, particularly those that are vulnerable, will be providing care and duties for younger brothers and sisters and supporting them to get to school. So again, having something at 8 a.m. can present as a barrier. When it comes to the school level, again, the biggest barrier that we sort of came across was lack of funding. So again, in primary school, this has, you know, a lot of money has been going to it for the past few decades, and obviously, as we've just seen, it's now become universal. But in secondary schools, it's often a question between breakfast or something else around maybe IT equipment or something. Some school policies can make it a little bit more difficult to implement. This is very changeable, and it just needs sort of engagement with the senior and leadership teams. But also we did realise that there's some sort of socio-cultural perceptions that some people just don't realise breakfast is, you know, the most important meal of the day. It's kind of that cliche, but actually the evidence does seem to suggest that that may be true, and some people just don't understand that. So where it's not universal and they're making those decisions between where funding goes, they're not understanding the benefits in terms of attention, attainment, behaviour, etc., that they could have. Again, we've then got the structural levels, so kind of the culture in the UK. So teenage lifestyles, again, in other places, it may be more normal to sit and have breakfast with your parents. In the UK, that's not necessarily a sort of standard cultural approach for teenagers. Again, economic inequalities, so people, as we've already noted, that live in more disadvantaged areas are much less likely to be able to have the time or the money to afford breakfast. And again, as was sort of noted as well, the gender norms, which are a bit beyond the UK. I think there's a bit of a, at least a sort of Western Hemisphere kind of approach to gender norms at the moment, sort of propagated by influencers, social media, etc. But again, that both women might want to eat less food, boys might want to eat more, but quite specific. They don't want to fill up on carbs. They want to be having high protein and sort of high protein dense foods instead. Again, we then looked at the sort of broader challenges around food, and for the most place, these really sort of replicated what's happening with breakfast. I think the only other thing to note would be sort of school food standards and the perception from some people that school food still isn't great. This tends to come more from parents rather than from young people, but it is just a note there. And then also that some schools will be sort of limited by procurement practices and will have to go via their sort of preferred supplier that might not do breakfast, and then it really complicates their ability to bring on extra food. So they're the kind of key challenges, but obviously organisations such as Magic Breakfast and the charitable approach can circumvent that in many, many cases. So the key thing we then wanted to look at was what don't we know, because as we sort of said at the beginning, the reason we were asked to do this research is there is less evidence on what happens in secondary school. And I think what we found as well, we could fill in lots of the gaps, that a few other gaps sort of emerged through the research. So first of all, there's no sort of national public health data on adolescent breakfast eating, whereas there is on younger children. There's also a lack of research that compares the effectiveness and impact of different models of breakfast provision. So there's so many that can be done. We spoke to a school that had kind of the children prepare it themselves. They'd have almost like breakfast monitors in different classes. Some can be there's breakfast available in every class all the time. Others it's a set time. There's break times. We've seen ones where there's incentives brought in for how many breakfasts you have. There's so many different models, and the research tends to look at the efficacy of one alone rather than comparing and contrasting different ones. There's a lack of insight that considers food provision across the whole school day. So there's a lot of research on lunch. There's a lot of research on breakfast. There's a lot of research on after school clubs, but nothing that maybe considers that whole, or a lot less at least that considers that whole. In terms of the demographics, there's quite a lot on gender and sort of economic inequality, but beyond that, there's not as much. Obviously, though, when we're thinking about food, there are big kind of cultural differences and also religious differences, which should be something to be considered. There's also a lack of understanding of the social benefits of breakfast provision. So this research exists, but it's very emergent. And I think understanding the longer term impacts of having that safe space would be really, really important. It tends to be quite short term impacts at the moment. Again, there is some research on the impact of breakfast on attainment and attendance, but it tends to be more focused on younger children. So again, a sort of national research project that could draw on a public health data set would be very, very useful. As Magic Breakfast have sort of started being doing, so we finished this research about 6 months ago, but they've now started to understand how to consider the social return on investment. But again, our research has highlighted some of these very, very long-term ones. So it could be that we look at even longer-term social return on investment too. And then also what we've really, really tried to explore, and there was just a significant lack of data, was different types of schools to consider and sort of alternative provision, private versus public schools, middle schools, etc., etc. And there's just really limited research. It tends to be just on your sort of bog standard secondary school. And then finally, just to kind of wrap up what this sort of means. So I think the key thing is considering what happens next. And as the research gaps and priorities have hopefully shown, there is a need to know more. There is a need to really sort of delve into the places where this is happening, but also to take a national picture to understand what the potential benefits could be. This is benefiting already, sort of the lower level evidence on crime, attainment, lifelong earning potential, health, mental health, all of these amazing things. And if we can really, really, really bring together and show kind of without doubt what the benefits are, then hopefully, the government will move to lead to universal provision for secondary school children as well. And we'll stop having that kind of cliff edge of 11 years old. We also need to consider the different types of models to prioritise. There needs to be, I think, a focus on providing a nutritious breakfast. Where schools can provide it, often it is, they're very limited. So we've met schools where teachers are sort of supplementing it, and then it can be kind of higher sugar and cheaper options, moving away from kind of high protein or fruit and vegetables. That idea of a sort of holistic approach where there is that social element in is very important. And we also need to continue to promote provision that minimises the stigma and gets rid of that kind of embarrassment around having breakfast with your peers. It's important to understand what messaging works to really get the benefits of breakfast to schools, to get more schools to kind of sign up to this, because they can have quite immediate impacts in terms of their what the classrooms look and feel like. To understand what messaging works also for the other key stakeholder groups. And again, as we've said, for the UK and devolved governments to continue investment into school breakfast programmes, which in turn would grow that evidence base. I'll leave it there. Thank you. Sorry for going on a minute or too long.
Thank you very much for a really interesting and insightful whistle-stop tour of the research, but also really helpful to highlight, actually, as you say, what we don't know, and that was really important to us at Magic Breakfast as well. Just to reflect in terms of the point you'd made about secondary age young girls in particular, having that aversion to eating breakfast in front of their peers. I was at a secondary school in Sunderland not long ago with an MP, and there was a group of girls in the corner who weren't eating, chatting away, and as soon as the bell rang for classes to start, they all went, picked up something to eat, and as they were walking, I asked, why didn't you eat during the breakfast club? And they're like, oh, we don't want to eat in front of the boys. So it absolutely resonates in terms of what we see on the ground in our schools. And with that, we are going to go now to one of Magic Breakfast's partner schools. But just before we do, I want to remind everyone the questions that you have, having heard from Nat, having heard from Dr. Maddie and Iona, please do put those into the Q&A section, which is just at the top of your screen. You can add those in, as I say, to make sure that you capture them as they occur to you. But now we're going to go to Co-op Academy Bellevue, and delighted to welcome Dan Haste, who is the Vice Principal of Social Inclusion, which, based on then the more detailed overview of his role, I think is a very succinct summary for an awful lot of responsibility and care that you obviously give to the pupils at that school. And really pleased as well to welcome Sue Sparrow, who is Facilities Manager and Breakfast Club Lead. So in terms of the people who make the magic happen on a daily basis, it is very much these individuals. So a very big thank you and welcome, and I'll hand over now.
Thanks, Lindsay. Hi everyone, my name is Dan. I'm the Vice Principal at Co-op Academy Bellevue. I joined the academy about 3 years ago. When I joined, we had a sort of a little bit more of a meager breakfast offering for the students, so the slice of toast in the morning. We partnered up quite quickly. I partnered up with Magic Breakfast to set up a little bit of a better offer for our students, and it sort of impacts us in a lot of ways. So I just wanted to start by saying a big thank you to Magic Breakfast for the impact it's had on the academy and the students and the community that we serve as well. If you go to the next slide, please. So just to give you some context of the community that we serve, so wonderful community, the Gorton area, Gorton and Denton, have been in the news a little bit recently, but it is a sort of highly deprived community. So in the 2025 indices of deprivation report that the government put out, for example, Manchester placed 10th in the proportion of population living in deprived outcomes based on children. Within the Manchester local authority, we're one of, if not the most deprived communities based on the indicators of deprivation, one of which for our students being the access to regular hot meals. We do a lot in the academy to overcome that. The first thing we do every day is a pretty consistent breakfast club offering. So we've got 958 students on roll. We're a successful academy. We're a new school, so this is our first academic year where we've had 5-year groups. Around 60% of our students are pupil premium, access pupil premium funding, so 6 in 10 students. Just for context, that's about triple the national average, if not a little bit more than triple the national average, and 59.7 are eligible for free school meals. Unemployment as one of those indicators of deprivation that the government report out on in the area is significantly high as well. Having said that, it's a really deserving community. A lot of first and second generation immigrants in the community, a really deserving community. The students in the academy are exceptionally well behaved and exceptionally well supported by the academy as well. And one of the key things for us for that is the morning breakfast. We're an inner city academy. Because we're in a city and because we are a new academy, we don't actually have a bus service, which sort of impacts us in a lot of different ways. One of which is the students have different challenges in how to get to the academy. One way we overcome that is we open up at 7:30 every morning. So we open up quite a lot earlier than most academies would. And that's because we sort of calculated that the student that lived the furthest away, that was the best time for them to arrive. And if it's a choice for us between 7:30 and 8:45, 15 minutes later, we will always say 7:30. So we open early for them. And at that point, we start our breakfast club offering. So our breakfast club offering in the morning before school starts lasts for about 45 to 50 minutes. And we have a sort of group of consistent students, 20, 30 students sort of waiting at the gate. As soon as that gate opens, they come running in for their breakfast. And we provide Magic Breakfast offering. We provide some fruit that Sue will talk about, and we also provide some special treats on occasions, which I'll talk about a little bit later on, but I'll pass to Sue now just to talk about what the provision looks like.
Hi everyone, I'm Sue Sparrow, the Facilities Manager for Co-op Bellevue. I've got sort of 7 to 10 years experience working with breakfast clubs. It's all down to sort of me coming in at about 6 o'clock in the morning to start the cooking of the bagels and setting it all up. The students have access to bagels, cereal. We're quite lucky we have a Tesco funding, which is fruit. We provide yogurts and things like that. We have jam, we have like Philadelphia, all sorts of sort of toppings. It's a well-attended breakfast club. I would say about 200 children arrive, and we serve them through that point, which is quite a large sort of offering, really. It's a safe space for students to come to. They sit and chat. They will do like sit and catch up on work. They will read. We do sort of themed days where sometimes there's a bit of a dip day. We recognise like Wednesday might be a dip day, so we offer them treats, like special things, like they might have a hot chocolate with marshmallows, whipped cream in it. I know that's not very healthy, but sometimes it's just a bit of a boost, because Wednesday could be a dip day, could be a Friday, because it's a shorter day for us here. The students, I would say, absolutely love it, and they come in and we offer a good provision here, and a lot of that is because I am lucky with the head teacher gives me some funding to be able to buy them the things that go on top of these bagels and the milk and everything. But I think a lot of the time, by the end of the year, that's running out. So you kind of have to draw back a little bit on your provision. You know, social skills for children. We have children who come, you know, we do family dining at Bellevue, but in the morning, you know, when I first came here, there were students who couldn't even butter a bagel. So we taught them how to sort of get the knife, you know, and butter the bagel. And it's just little things like that that people, you know, don't see. Unless they come and visit it. People are welcome to come and visit our breakfast club anytime. And I, being a parent myself, my children are older, I would have absolutely loved my children to have access to something like this in the morning, because I feel it's really important. Also, we support the exams, so we do sort of an early morning for the exams in a separate space while they revise. So I just think it's really important, and any funding that we can get from anybody just makes this provision, you know, it makes it run and attracts more children to it. It's really important. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks. Yeah, so there's some information there on the slide about impact, but I would say ultimately, and Sue sort of summed a lot of this up, is that the impact for us probably can be categorized into 3 different categories. There's a massive element of belonging for the students. So like I said, you've got sort of the same students arriving, they sit in the same place in the morning, they have sort of breakfast friends that they sit at breakfast club with. We have split lunches for different year groups. So some students mix with different year groups at breakfast club and make friends there, and that's when they see those students every day. So that's wonderful. It builds that sort of sense of belonging, that welcoming. It's a happy smiling face. So we don't want the students to arrive every day and be sort of shouted at and barked at about attendance and this, that, and the other. It's more of a welcoming point in the day where they're able to speak to the head of year, speak to Sue, speak to a member of the team to address any issues they've got. So I think social belonging is massive. Some of the research and the evidence talked before about the impact on the academic as well. Certainly, we operate a longer school day at the academy, so our students only leave at 4:35, which is quite a long day. So, like I said, we put provision in for breakfast to make sure the bellies are full in the morning, and then we do a family dining provision at lunch, so we make sure everybody eats during lunch, and we don't have, like some of that evidence suggests, we don't have the typical maybe group of girls that are avoiding eating lunch and this and the other. We make sure the students are fed all the time. And then the third one, which sort of feeds into everything, which I think is probably one of the most significant things and a big part of my role, is attendance as well. So like Sue said, when she talks about dip days, that's maybe a day we've identified as a possible risk in terms of attendance. So we will put an extra provision in place. We will publicise the early morning club. So the students that are there from 7:30 to 7:45, for example, the early morning club, they get 20 merits just for coming into school early and getting ready early. And we sort of promote it that way. But as a result, as an academy, we had the best attendance of any mixed school for the first term. And that's a sort of significant achievement, especially for a school that's looking at 60% pupil premium. We're in the top 10% nationally of even similar schools, and the government compares in terms of attendance based on 20 similar schools, and we placed top in all of the categories this year. And I don't think it can be understated the impact that a strong breakfast club can have on that. Another part of my role, I think, is also sort of admissions, and this year, because we're so popular, I had the sort of pleasure of sitting 70 appeal hearings, and you'd be amazed at how many parents sit in appeal hearings, and you get sort of insight about why parents are choosing to send the students to the school. And you'd be amazed how many parents sit there and say, I want my child to be there at 7:30 and get a warm breakfast and set up for the day. So it's a big impact, and it's a big relief and a big helping hand to the families that we serve as well, knowing that they don't have to pay for breakfast food and they can put that money elsewhere, and we will take care of that for them in the morning if they can get the children to school on time. Yeah, that's it from me. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dan and Sue. So I think we're going to now bring all of our speakers back on screen, thanks to the magic that is being worked in the background by the team. Brilliant. And just a reminder, you're able to, I can see some questions are already coming through, which is brilliant. But any questions that you have for any of the speakers, please drop them into the Q&A slot there. One question that I did kind of see that came through was Nat, for you, if that's all right. And it's asking about the, obviously, Dr. Maddie and Iona rocket science team have identified quite a lot of areas that are missing evidence at the moment. You called out 4 areas that we'll be prioritising and focusing on in the next couple of years. Can you just give, I guess, an explanation, context as to why those areas?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a sort of number of different factors that we considered as part of that sort of planning. So firstly, from Maddie and Iona speaking about the research, there are gaps specifically across those 4 themes. What we also recognise and know is that those themes are sort of core to the outcomes that this current government, and I imagine a future government in a couple of weeks' time, will also be really focusing and looking at. So it sort of builds on what we as Magic Breakfast already know, that school breakfast, a free school breakfast provision, a meal, it's more than just the food. And particularly for teenage and that sort of older cohort, we want to think about those additional benefits, that beyond food piece, across those key themes that are really specific and important for them. So if we think about the primary provision we've seen, for example, with the Westminster government in London, one of the key parts of their thinking for the Free Breakfast Club programme was including provision for childcare as well. Really important for primary age pupils where they are, much younger. For teenagers, there's more independence, that need is less. So for us thinking about what do older pupils need, what can breakfast give them, beyond that food, beyond just alleviating morning hunger, those were the 4 areas that really stood out to us, especially the sort of topicality of young people not in education, employment and training, which is obviously incredibly prevalent at the moment, and I think will continue to be so for the years to come. So it's aligning the gaps, what we don't know, what we could and what we want to know, what we see from our provision, and thinking about how can we scale, how can we expand, how can we build that to that sort of national ambition for school breakfast provision.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nat. I'm going to come, if it's all right, to Dr. Maddie and Iona with the next question. I'm very grateful for some really interesting presentations. This question asker is interested in the link mentioned between school breakfast provision and reduction in criminal activity, county lines and child exploitation. This is currently a key policy priority across the UK. Could you please say a bit more about the evidence base or point toward the sources as well, please?
Yeah, of course. I'm just going to pass to Iona because she did the research on this part and she actually leads up a lot of the work we do at Rocket Science on violence reduction as well. So she's worked on lots of different projects across the UK with violence reduction units.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so thank you for the question. I mean, I think first off, I definitely recommend reading the report itself, which I think Maddie just has the link for, where we go into a little bit more detail on this. And we also cover kind of some of our conversations that we had with the London Violence Reduction Unit about the Holiday Hope programme, which was kind of really informative. I definitely recommend also looking at the Youth Endowment Fund technical report on nutritional interventions, which was produced last year. And that kind of really goes into the detail of the different kinds of interventions that sort of work with young people, and all the kind of various outcomes we were talking around kind of reduced kind of aggression, antisocial behaviour, violence, sort of offending. So that's a really, really great source that I would particularly recommend looking into.
If you pass me that link, I'll put it in the chat as well.
Yeah.
We'll make sure both those links are in the chat. Our full report is on Magic Breakfast's website. So if you do want to look in any of the detail areas that we've discussed in detail, there's references throughout, so you can find the original sources.
Brilliant, thank you. Dan and Sue, I'm not sure who's best placed to take this one, but there's just a question around the kind of, I guess, the funding. How does the funding, the money work at your school? I know every school is different in this regard. For the breakfast provision that you provide, you reference quite a few different sources and elements. So if you could just speak to that, please.
Yeah. I'm quite lucky that the head teacher, the principal, allocates me a set amount of money every year at the start of the year in September, and that is then sort of divided up from me over the sort of the months of Breakfast Club, and I can utilise that however I want. It's quite a healthy one, which is good, because not many schools get that kind of funding from their head teacher, because there's just not that level of money available. Tesco, we won a grant from Tesco, and we've won it 2 years in succession, and last year they gave us £18,000, and that was for fruit, to provide fruit for the academy, which we go out and buy, and they have it at Breakfast Club, they have it at break, they have it at lunchtime, any events, which is massive really. And it's, you know, we do utilise it. They've topped it up again this year, and it is that is the, without that kind of money from the budgets, you wouldn't be able to run a successful Breakfast Club, and that's why we need to go out. I know personally I went out to Quakers because porridge is really popular, and asked them was there anything they could do, and I just got a response of no, we can't help you, which, you know, I find absolutely mad in this sort of current world. Like, why can't they just send us a little bit of something? And it's really popular porridge at the school, so, you know, it's just little things like that for me.
The internal money comes through pupil premium funding as well. That's where that budget will come from. We make some use of hardship funding as well where necessary with individuals.
Brilliant, thank you. And just Sue, while I have you, if that's all right, on the mic, there was a question here, just wondering about the kind of cohort of pupils who are showing up on a regular basis. Are they typically the younger students? Is it any age group? Is there a mix? Tell us a little bit about them, please.
I would say it's a mix of all year groups, which makes it really sort of successful, if you like, because, you know, you've got sort of younger children who are just starting, really sort of frightened at the school, and then you've got the older peers. And here at Bellevue, like, you know, they will really look after one another. If there's a problem, there's staff around as well, you know, children come and talk to us. But I would say it's all year groups, because they're all hungry. So, you know, they're getting dropped off from working parents, possibly because there's no bus facility, and they come in really early for that reason. So it's a good mixture across the board, really.
I'd say it's a high proportion of the students that come in early are quite a vulnerable cohort as well. So they come into sort of quite calm, even calmer, really. It's calm typically, but even calmer early in the morning, some time with the friends.
One thing I would add that I didn't say during my talk as well is it's quite interesting. You know, you sometimes get certain pupils who come in who might come up and have sort of 4 bagels, and that is a good safeguarding highlight then, because then I can report that to the head of year. Is you might just need to check in, because we don't have a food bank, we have a free delivery from Sainsbury's, so then we can contact the parent and say, you know, are you struggling, can we help you with sort of food that we get in from the Sainsbury's? So it highlights all different things at that time in the morning, you know, for the children.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I'm going to come back to you, Nad, if it's all right. We have a local councillor here, in a district council, sorry, that doesn't currently have responsibility for schools and education, but after the local government reorganisation, they will do. While recognising that most secondary schools are academies, what do you think local authorities or local education authorities can do to encourage or mandate free breakfast provision?
Thank you, and congratulations, Louise, for getting that jurisdiction. That's excellent. There's, I think, different ways of doing it. As Maddie and Iona were talking about, the sort of narratives and how we're talking about school breakfast is really important. So, you know, building on health benefits, the social belonging, like all of those additional benefits alongside sort of tackling child poverty is like a key way to be speaking about it. In terms of encouraging and mandating it, we at Magic Breakfast, we have partnerships with some local authorities, sort of Wandsworth, Camden and Fulham as well, which also, alongside their primary provision, do secondary provision as well. So there are opportunities to be able to do that for local authority funded schools as opposed to academies. What's interesting as well is how the budget lines are being used from a local authority perspective. So some, for example, will consider using their public health budget to support breakfast club provision for secondary schools. Some will think about their education budget. Both are completely valid. Local government funding streams are varied, to say the least. But I think what that really speaks to is that sort of importance of a place-based approach. So when we think about secondary breakfast, we want that national ambition from sort of central government. But the only way it's going to work in practice is that flexibility at the local level, at a regional level, to be able to deliver that on the ground. So I was really struck by a point, Dan, you made earlier about transport issues and not having that bus service for children to be able to get into school. So that, I think, for me, is that key example of how to be able to do it flexibly to meet the needs of what your local authority or your area, your place sort of needs on the ground as well. So I hope that's helpful.
I would just add that I think that's really, really, really key, Natalie, and yeah, particularly those messaging points around health attainment, all of those things that schools sort of have responsibility for. What we actually found, it wasn't secondary schools, but it was with a college, so similar age group, just a college. And we were doing, it was actually a sort of college-wide survey on poverty generally. And when we were able to tell the senior leadership team that I think it was it 1 in 3 children were coming, or young people were coming to college hungry, overnight they started doing breakfast and they moved funding. So I think there's also a bit of around encouraging the institution to hear from its students and to actually understand the scale of the challenge, because I think breakfast hunger can often be quite hidden and isn't as obvious maybe as hunger at lunchtime.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And Dan, I can see you also have a point to add.
Yeah, just from my point of view as well, it's certainly a priority to us, but a national priority at the moment is attendance and improving attendance, sort of since COVID. And for us, it's not insignificant the impact that Sue and the Breakfast Club has on attendance and punctuality, and sort of the way our attendance team will use the Breakfast Club to get students in the morning on the phone when they're maybe a little bit reluctant. So I think publicising the impact that it can have on attendance as well, and then attendance has all those impacts times by 10 on academic outcomes and future life earnings, and there's plenty of research into that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm conscious we've covered lots of the kind of macro, the statistics, the research. So can we come to you for the final quick point? Is there a student or a child that you think about in terms of, the impact that breakfast provision has really had on them? I think, as Nat, you touched on, it's always really critical that we remember that the children that are actually behind these national statistics and provisions. So any story that you'd be able to share, please?
Probably too many. I wouldn't say there's any sort of single ones really, because there's that many with a story. At the end of the day, they're all there really for a reason, and they're all there because they're hungry, because they're not getting fed at home. School sometimes and often is the only place where they eat, so they're there on the door. So I would say more than anything, I just get great comfort at the fact that they all attend, and I know that I can feed them and I'm there to support it. And a lot of schools struggle because they haven't got, I have somebody who helps me, who comes in early every morning to help me outside their working hours, and without sort of that person, with that help, you can't run it, and a lot of schools struggle with that. So I wouldn't sort of say there's any single child, there's many. And when we do sort of the dip day ones, the children coming through the door just, emphasises the importance of it. And, people are welcome to come and visit and view it. I have no problems with that at all, just to see the impact. So.
Oh, thank you, Sue. I suspect you'll have a queue at the door with that kind offer, and after everything you and Dan have described for us this morning. And hopefully Maddie, who asked about kind of how to share with colleagues the impact of breakfast provision, hopefully that gives some valuable food for thought as well. I am sad to say that we are coming to the end of our time. I just wanted to say a very big thank you again to our wonderful speakers who have taken time out of their day to join us today and also to prepare. Particular thanks, Dan and Sue, again, for making this happen on a daily basis for all of those children and young people. And for those of you who have been asking questions around the impact of breakfast, interested in the points about belonging, in particular, that were noted in some of the presentations, I'm very excited to share that today our annual breakfast survey, the day everybody waits for in their annual calendar, the annual breakfast survey has been published. So this is our annual, it's actually 10 years now that we've been doing this, annual survey of our partner schools, asking them, their teachers, their children and young people about the impact that a Magic Breakfast makes, and also the opportunities for a Magic Breakfast to be improved. And we take this feedback and these learnings really to heart and bring them into the centre of our planning and our improvement. So please do watch our socials and be sure to have a look at that. As I mentioned, the recording will be shared with all of you as well, and we would encourage you to pass it on to colleagues. Stay cool and hydrated as much as you possibly can. And just again, a very big thank you to everyone for being part of the Magic Breakfast family, for helping us to achieve this impact and for helping us to go even faster and further for secondary age pupils, because hunger doesn't end at age 11. And as we've heard today, there's a huge opportunity in terms of expanding our reach and our impact in this area. So a very big thank you to everyone. Have a great day.